So essentially that means that my job is to look after our level 4 students, and that means putting the courses together, the delivery materials, the wines that we use, the educators that we use, everything diploma related. So it's myself, not just myself and a small team of 4 members of staff that look after approximately 500 to 600 diploma students per year. Those students that may be just starting a course or just moving on to the D3 in the second semester, plus those students that are perhaps taking a break, a pause in their studies and are returning to resit outstanding exams or just complete modules that they haven't yet started. So the idea of this session then is to give you a little bit of information about the course, what's involved, what we're expecting from students, what you've got to do, give you a little bit of information in terms of how we're going to support you through that process and what makes us different from other level 4 providers around the world, what we've got to offer our students. We'll look at briefly some different formats. I appreciate that lots of you will have questions about the different formats that we offer, but we will take a look at that and why the diploma is perhaps a suitable program of study for yourselves. Okay, so we can move on, Rachel, please. Possibly. Oh no, I'm doing the slides. That's silly of me. Okay, right. Right, so the diploma then, a market-leading qualification, setting a global standard for wine education. I think it's in its the simplest form. I think the diploma is something that is recognised around the world as a stamp of authority in terms of a successful candidate's knowledge about the product. And I think that's probably quite important to emphasise. It is a product knowledge focused qualification. So it's all about wine and why it tastes like it does. There are elements relating to wine business, there are elements relating to wine production, but be under no illusion that it's going to teach you how to make wine or teach you how to sell wine or market wine. They are just elements of a wider qualification that focuses on product knowledge, the product itself. But it's a real, I think, as I say, we often refer to it as a driving license, a real stamp that you know about wine, and then you can use that information together with perhaps another discipline like marketing or retail, sales, buying, to really help you kind of build your career and give you some real insight into different aspects of wine production, and wine business. Okay, right. So I think it's really important that before we start looking at the diploma and what's involved, we have an understanding in terms of where it fits in the I suppose the wider scheme of WSET qualifications. It's the only level 4 wine qualification that the WSET offers, and there are 4 levels. Most of you will probably be familiar with, I think, the lower levels, perhaps level 2 and level 3. And now that you're thinking about moving on to the diploma. But I think if we look at the suite of WSET wine qualifications, it gives you some insight in terms of what's expected of you as a student, but perhaps more importantly for this short presentation, what's expected of you as a student and how the qualification changes from the preceding qualifications. So at level 1, it's all about factual recall. So for those of you that have done level 1, you learn about some very simple styles of wine, and the assessment is designed to make sure you know the facts. You don't need to understand why those facts, those correct answers are the correct answers, just that they are the correct answer. So as part of the assessment, you're associating a certain phrase with a certain term that you know is the right answer, but there's no explanation as to why. At level 2, things are very much the same. So you still need to know the facts. You're still assessed on your product knowledge, your ability to recall the facts. But the key difference here is that the specification is much broader. So you learn about a larger variety of different grapes, of different wine styles, of different production regions. But the assessment is very much the same in terms of recognizing the correct answer from amongst the distractors. And then at level 3, so I appreciate that some of you are perhaps in the process of completing level 3, or perhaps have just finished level 3, but this is where things change considerably. You still need to know the facts, so you still need to know all that information that you may have accumulated through level 1 and level 2, plus additional facts for level 3, different regions, wines, etc. But the key difference here is that the examiners are going to test you on your understanding of those facts, your ability to explain, plus your ability to apply certain processes, wine production processes, to different styles of wine to help you explain why they taste like they do. So for those of you that have completed the level 3 qualification, as part of the assessment, you did a series of short answer questions. You were asked the question, there was a space below to write your answer, and that's where the examiners were assessing your comprehension, your application skills, your ability to demonstrate your understanding. And then as we move to level 4, that process of the examiners wanting you to demonstrate your understanding continues. So actually, a lot of the assessment types at level 4 are very similar to those at level 3. You're presented with a series of questions, and then you have to write out your answer to demonstrate that you know the facts. You can explain a certain concept. You can apply the process, the process of a particular production method to a particular wine style to help you explain why it tastes the way that it does. I think that the big difference as we move to level 3 to level 4, though, is in terms of the theoretical assessments, the examiners are also going to test higher level skills as well. So they're not just testing comprehension and application, product knowledge, factual recall. They're also testing your analytical skills. They're testing your evaluative skills. And then for a single assessment as part of the diploma, they're assessing your creative skills as well. And I think that's the, I suppose, the key feature that differentiates the theoretical part of the assessment at level 4 from level 3. I suppose the other fairly obvious difference as we move to level 4 from level 3 is that your tasting ability is much more heavily scrutinized than at level 3. So at level 3 you had 2 samples. For level 4, and for the course of all 6 units, you're going to have 18 samples. So your ability to taste, to describe, to evaluate, to identify is a much bigger part of the assessment. Okay, right, let us move on. So gaining the diploma. So I think there are some fairly obvious advantages of gaining the diploma. It allows you to use the postnominal WSET, and as I said earlier, this is a real stamp that you know all about this particular product, the product of wine. But the assessment process is designed to equip you with specialist and expert analytical skills within the wine industry. So it allows you to better describe, to evaluate, to analyze certain wines, and then use your knowledge of those particular wines to explain to perhaps customers, colleagues, peers, why they taste the way that they do. So you get this really, I think, quite specific and really useful skill set by completing the diploma. I think the other real advantage of gaining the diploma, it might not be immediately apparent, but it might be something that you've experienced somewhat as you've done the level 3 qualification, is that it gives you access to a global network of like-minded individuals. What we tend to find at the WSET School London is we get a really lovely mix of students. So those students that are in the industry, those students that aren't in the industry, and within the industry, lots of varied roles in terms of sales, in terms of buying, in terms of marketing, possibly in terms of production. So we get a really nice demographic of students, and that makes for I think a fantastic level of interaction within the classroom, both online and in person. And I think that's really important at level 4, because at level 4, it's not just someone stood at the front going through a series of slides for a classroom-based course. It's about presenting a topic, presenting some facts relating to that particular topic, and then encouraging a discussion within the group, either online or within the classroom. So it's really important that you've got that varied group of students within the classroom to get a more dynamic discussion. And I think post diploma, when you've achieved the qualification, that advantage continues. You've still got access to that network. You've likely developed a new kind of clique of friends that you'll associate with well beyond completing the course. So you've got access to those skills, those friendships beyond the diploma. Okay, right. So perhaps some nuts and bolts here then. So I think this slide can appear somewhat terrifying, for want of a better word. So a minimum of 500 hours of study, 12 hours of solid examinations, about 25% of the recommended study time. So about 125 hours will be in the classroom or as part of online activities. It's roughly the same whether you do an online course or a classroom course. And the remainder of the time is home-based study. So I think it's really important for prospective students to realize that we're not going to be able to teach you everything you need to know in the classroom. So the idea of the classroom sessions, the online sessions, is to present the topic, cover the basics of those topics, to check that you've got a good understanding of the digital materials, and to give students the opportunity to ask any questions. But a large proportion of that 500-hour study time, 75%, is actually you working on the topic, developing your understanding, memorizing facts, etc., as you move through the course. I think to put that into perspective, so the recommended study time for level 3 is 84 hours. So I think a nice way to think about the level 4 course is as 6 mini qualifications. And that works quite nicely as we'll move on to the structure of the diploma course in a moment. But the diploma is split into 6 units. So it's a nice way to think about it as perhaps 6 mini qualifications rather than one big one. I think as one big qualification, it can appear quite unwieldy, but as 6 mini qualifications, I think it becomes much more digestible and approachable. Okay, so it takes a while. So normally takes between 18 and 36 months to complete, and that's very much dependent on the format that you choose. If you choose a format that is perhaps somewhat more intensive, so blocks of study days, then the program's going to be shorter. If you pick a mode of study where you're attending perhaps one evening per week, or you decide to perhaps take a pause between the first semester and the second semester, I'll explain that in a moment, then obviously it's going to take longer. I mean, on average, I would say that most students take about 2 years to complete the program. But the good news is there's no real time limits on completing the course. You can take it at your own pace. So if you wanted to pause between first and second semester, if you're unsuccessful in some of the assessments and want to take a little bit more time to prepare for those, then you can. So I think it's a nice course because you can take it at your own pace by and large. Okay, I mean, I absolutely love this slide because, I mean, this is it. This is the diploma, and it's a slide that makes it look really simple. And I suppose in its format, it is. So Detailed here, we've got the 6 units. So D1, wine production, D2, wine business, and then, well, they would be referred to as the foundation units. And then we've got D3, wines of the world, D4, sparkling wines, D5, fortified wines, and then D6, the research assignment. And they are considered the product knowledge units. So perhaps just to elaborate on that a little bit more. The foundation units D1 and D2, these are taught and assessed first. And the reason for that is you will be reassessed on your understanding of wine production and wine business as you move on to the product knowledge units. So it's really important that you have a good understanding of both wine production primarily and wine business, because you're going to use that knowledge for the rest of the course. So that's why we teach and we attempt those assessments first. You don't necessarily have to pass those assessments. We just want to make sure that we've taught you the content to give you the knowledge that you need to successfully attempt the remaining units. And then we've got D3, D4, D5, D6, the product knowledge units. The focus here tends to be a little bit more on grape varieties, styles of wine, regions, etc. I think the really good news about the qualification since it was relaunched in 2019 is that, with the exception of D6, everything you need to know is in the digital materials that we provide for you. So essentially, if it's not in the digital materials, then you don't need to know it. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't read more widely on the topic, because that can help supplement your understanding. But it does mean that if it's not in those digital materials, it's not assessed, which I think is a really nice thought. D6 is a bit different, and that's because they're testing those high-level skills, your creative skills. They typically pick a topic whereby it isn't widely covered within the digital material, so you're forced to look elsewhere to test your ability to research and analyze and problem solve. So at the WSET School in London, we offer courses via a semester format. So we break those courses down into a first semester, roughly half the content, which we'll come on to in a moment, and the second semester, again, roughly half the content, to make it somewhat more approachable, more affordable, and more digestible. Irrespective as to what format you pick, the qualification is exactly the same and the delivery is exactly the same. So delivery in terms of the educators, the timings, the only real difference is whether you choose an online format or a classroom-based format, and in which case the delivery of those online materials is obviously slightly different. But most importantly, the outcome, the qualification, post-nominal is exactly the same. Okay, so you need to achieve a pass in each of those units, D1 through to D6, and a pass is 55%. So I often joke, but I like to think of that as 55%, where you need to demonstrate to the examiners that you know a little bit more than you don't. And achieving a pass in each of those units then allows you to use the post-nominal DipWSET. So I think probably the next stage of this presentation is how we're going to support you through that process. And I think this is probably the part of the presentation which more clearly demonstrates how the school is different to other diploma providers. So we have a dedicated diploma team. As I say, we have about 500 or 600 students each year. I can't look after all those students myself, so I'm supported by Lauren Denyer, who looks after our enrichment activities, Angela Sattler, who is our administrator, who largely looks after the inbox and processes feedback papers. And then we've got Richard Lane, who's new to the team, who looks after or helps Lauren in supporting students and does a proportion of the teaching as well. But most importantly, by having a team, you've got someone that you can get in touch with. whether that's with administrative questions, questions about examinations, or academic questions. We have a teaching faculty. I can show you a few members of the teaching faculty. Unlike level 3, at level 4, you're likely to have lots of different educators. So if you did your level 3 with the WSET school, you might have seen a different person each week. If you did it elsewhere, you might have seen the same person every single week. That's not going to happen for level 4. So we've got a pool of about 16 educators, diploma educators. About half of those educators are MWs. About half of those educators are going through the MW process. They're MW candidates. But most importantly, they are subject experts. So I pick specific educators for specific sessions, depending on their background, their knowledge, their expertise. So you can be confident that the person stood at the front of the room knows what they're talking about and knows a lot more beyond the digital materials that you have access to. We use an online classroom. So we use the online classroom for additional resources that we make available to students. So things like quizzes, discussions, assignments, but we also use the online classroom to give students the opportunity to do practice assessments as well in the run up to exams. And we typically find that those students, perhaps not surprisingly, that engage in the classroom, be it online or in person, that engage with those additional resources, that do lots of practice questions, tend to be those students that perform well and achieve high grades. Classroom setup and class sizes. So maximum classroom number is typically 24. The average number, I would say, is about 20 students in a classroom. And you'll be within that same group of students throughout the first semester. You might be with slightly different students for the second semester, but it will be that same cohort of roughly 20 students, which I think is really nice because we've got a number that feels more personable in terms of the teaching experience, and also the ability to, I think, network with those people around you and get to know the students around you as well. So why into the teach? I think this is the statement of the century, obviously. But I think what is important is that certainly for in-person courses, our classroom-based courses, the focus of those classroom-based courses is tasting. That doesn't mean that's all we're doing. So absolutely, we're going through samples, about 6 samples per 2-hour session. And we're going through the SAT, and we're reinforcing the calibration process, how to use the SAT. But we're also using those samples to teach the theoretical elements as well. So we're not just picking a sample for a grape variety for a region, we're picking a sample for a grape variety, a region, a producer type, a production method, lots of different facets, so we can teach the theoretical component as well as the tasting component. And as a WSET school student, you also get access not just to those online resources, the fantastic teaching faculty, a great selection of samples, but also lots of other discounts and offers, such as tastings that we think you might be interested in, extracurricular activities that might be of interest and support to the learning process, but also discounts for things like wine materials. Caravan was a fairly recent offer. So lots of things that we feel might help support you through that learning process. Okay, right. So some of our educators, myself at the top and Lauren, and then we've got a variety of educators there, as I say, lots of different backgrounds, MWs, MW candidates, but as I say, all with a set of subject expertise and all picked to deliver certain sessions depending on their backgrounds and expertise. Okay, so I wanted to come back to this slide just to perhaps explain the semester format. So as I say, we split our courses, we split the diploma in 2, essentially. So a first semester course and a second semester course. And that makes it, I think, somewhat more accessible. It's an expensive course. It's a big both, I think, financial and mental undertaking. So we split it into two to give, to make it more approachable for a wider number of students. So the first semester is D1 and D2, the foundation units, and set the level of product knowledge that you're going to use for the remainder of the units. And then finally D4 sparkling wines and D5 fortified wines. So we're introducing the concept of tasting for these product knowledge units, D4 and D5, that have relatively low weighting. And those 4 units account for 40% of the qualification. Once you've achieved a pass in each of those units, then that pass is banked. And unless there is a significant change in the specification, they are banked indefinitely. So you won't be asked to repeat those assessments unless, as I say, there's a significant change in the specification, which is highly unlikely. So that gives you the time to study the diploma and achieve the qualification over a longer period of time, if you wish. You don't have to worry about things expiring. So we ask that you have sat, attempted D1 and D2, and then you can, at that point, you can register for a second semester course. You don't need to have passed those units. We just ask that you've sat the assessments, you've studied the materials. And our recommendation is, okay, ideally you sat and passed those assessments, and you sat in for either classroom sessions or online sessions for D4 and D5. And at that point, you can move on to the second semester. That's what we would typically recommend. And we organize our courses so that you study a unit, then you're assessed on that unit. You study a unit, then you're assessed on that unit. So at no point will you be studying multiple topics at the same time. So we're going to go through it sequentially to allow you to focus on one element at a time, to build your skills, to develop your understanding. So that's the first semester, D1, D2, D4, D5. The second semester is the remainder, so D3 and D6. This might appear somewhat lopsided. There are only 2 units here, but just bear in mind that D3 is 50% of the qualification. So it's an enormous chunk of the qualification. Essentially, it's everything that is not sparkling wine or fortified wine. So because it's so big, we pretty much dedicate the entirety of the second semester to D3, Wines of the World. D6 as well. D6 isn't taught. We have a workshop on D6, but D6 is the research assignment, which is done right at the end as the last assessment, where you can layer in the knowledge that you've accumulated throughout the qualification to tackle to produce an assignment, a 3,000-word assignment on a given topic. But the focus for D2 is clearly, the focus for the second semester is clearly D3. Okay, right. So this is the session that's perhaps a little bit word heavy in terms of the slides, but just to give you some idea in terms of the formats that we offer at the WSET School in London. So what I've tried to do here is I've tried to split them into kind of lower intensity formats where the pace is typically a little slower, and higher intensity formats where the pace is typically a little bit higher. As I say, the teaching is the same, the educators are the same, with the exception of online. I'll mention that in a moment. The qualification is exactly the same, but the paces are typically a little bit slower. So in terms of our lower intensity formats, we have Saturdays and Mondays. So this is where you attend once a week and you do 2 sessions on those days. So 2 sessions on a Monday, or you can do the Saturday course, 2 sessions on a Saturday. And that typically takes about 22 months. You won't come in every Saturday or every Monday. Once you've covered off a topic, there'll be a break, then you'll do the exam, and then you'll head back into the classroom. So this is nice for those of you that perhaps are in full-time employment, that can't dedicate time during the week, and perhaps want a slightly slower pace. Very popular, especially the Monday courses, because they're quite attractive to those of you that might be in the trade, certainly in hospitality, where Mondays is quite commonly a day where business is closed. Okay, evenings. So evenings represents, I think, the slowest pace. So one evening per week, 6:30 to 8:30 in the evening, and it takes around 26 months to complete, sometimes longer, and that will vary from course code to course code. The advantage here is that I think, well, it's probably not going to interfere with work, certainly if you're working daytime, and we've got a very slow pace. So one session per week, you've got the opportunity to read up, make sure that you've covered the materials before you sit the classroom session. So it is a really nice, I think, slow pace, but bear in mind that it will take longer. Then we've got the online course. So the online course is distinctly different. So there's only 2 days of classroom sessions over both of the semesters. And they are our tasting tutorial days, where you come to the school in Bermondsey and we go through tasting technique. The rest of the material is delivered online, not as a series of webinars, so nothing like what I'm doing now. It's a series of quizzes, assignments, discussions, where students are expected to make weekly submissions on these particular assignments or discussions, and then those assignments are graded and you get feedback on how you're doing. So the focus is perhaps a little bit more on the theory rather than tasting. There are still some webinar sessions, some live webinar sessions, but they are few and far between. So they are, as I say, the online course is typically kind of focused on you reading through the materials, you submitting, interacting with the online activities, making submissions, and then getting feedback. The advantage there, where you can do it at home. I suppose the disadvantage here is that for all the other formats, we're going to provide the wine. For the online format, you need to do that yourself. So yes, it's a lot cheaper, but I think you can expect to spend the difference between online and classroom on wine, depending on your situation. If you work in the industry, perhaps not. If you don't, then you're going to be spending much more money on wine to make sure that you're tasting through the samples as you go. So there are kind of lower intensity formats. In terms of higher intensity formats, we've got 3 options. We've got day release, block, and intensive block. Day release, so this is 1 day per week, 3 sessions on that day. 11 days for the first semester, 13 days for the second semester, and you'll be in the classroom from 9 o'clock until 4:30. And that takes about 22 months to complete over both of the semesters. And I think that's, I mean, if I were going to do the diploma again, that's probably the format that I would pick. There's a nice pace. There's some concentration in terms of you've got a day focusing on wines, but there you've got enough time to swat up on the materials before they're covered off each week. Block. So block is again much more intensive, probably more intensive than day release. So this is where students come for blocks of consecutive study. 4, 2, and 5 days for the first semester, and 4, and 5 days for the second semester. And that's 9 o'clock to 6:30 each day. And this is perhaps much more attractive to our international students because they get to come for a block of study. It's very focused, but it is more intensive because you're doing kind of potentially 5 days of study on wine at a time. Similar completion time, so about 22 months to the day release program. And this is a course that as a school, we also offer in our regional centres, so Manchester, Dublin, and Edinburgh. And then finally, we've got an intensive block. So this is, I think, more similar to a block course, except here we tend to squeeze the study into more intensive blocks. So for instance, the first semester is 4 days, 2 days, 5 days. The second semester is a 13-day block. So this is designed to appeal to those students that are coming from further away. where they don't want to make multiple trips, they perhaps want to save on costs, they can just come and do a 13-day block for the second semester. And that's, I mean, because it's more compact, it's more intense, you can typically get the course done in a much quicker format. But you need to make sure that you've got the time to dedicate to make sure you're prepared for those blocks of study before you attend. Right, I think it's really important for me to say at this point, it's a question I often get asked, is there a difference in terms of the pass rates, depending on the format that you choose? No, not really. It's the really nice answer. I mean, I think that's somewhat is a demonstration of, I think, the nice even level of teaching that we deliver across the courses. So within the classroom, it's pretty much even in terms of pass rates. There is a subtle difference between online courses and classroom courses. And well, that's mainly because, as I say, the classroom courses focus a little bit more on tasting. The online courses focus a little bit more on theory. So the pass rate for those students on an online format, the tasting tends not to be quite so good. It's still really good, and I'm very happy to say that our pass rates are between 10 and 15% higher than the global average, so other diploma centres around the world, but there is a slight difference between classroom and online courses. Okay, so I think that's it in terms of an overview. I'm just conscious that we've only got kind of 6 minutes scheduled, so I will take this time to have a look through some questions. Right, what have we got? Right, from Tam, in weekly course, there be any breaks? Yeah, okay. So for the weekly courses, so the Saturday, Monday courses or the day release courses, as I say, you will study a unit and then there'll be a break. So for the first semester, you'll do let's say 4 Tuesdays. So one Tuesday after another. And then you might get 2 or 3 Tuesdays off, and then you'll come and sit the exam. And then you'll come in for another couple of Tuesdays and you'll do D2. And then you have some Tuesdays off, and then you'll do the exam. So you do have breaks between the classroom section and then the examination. And the idea is that of that break as well, you take the time to do the self-study. In terms of samples, with the exception of D2, so wine business, where there's no real advantage in showing samples, you will probably have 18 samples a day. So typically it will be kind of 6 samples per session. That's certainly how it works for D3, perhaps slightly less for D1. But for sparkling wines, fortified wines, it's about 18 samples. I think, my goodness, I think it's around, for the whole course, it's about 240 samples. So lots of wine to try throughout. Okay. Oh my goodness, navigating the course in person without having a student visa. I mean, that's a question that I might have to tackle separately, but I think that the best approach, if visas are an issue, might be an online course. And that way you can visit just for the examinations rather than for solid blocks of study where it might be more difficult to secure a visa. We don't actually qualify as what's the phrase, as a full-time course. It's a part-time course, so securing a visa as a diploma student wouldn't be possible. So perhaps an online format might be better in that respect. Okay, I often get asked the next question. So from Ruth, how realistic is it to take the diploma successfully if you're not working in wine? Very. So probably kind of 6 years ago. I've been doing the diploma now for about kind of 8 years. So about 6 years ago, probably in a classroom of 24 students, we might have had 2 that weren't in the trade. Now we've probably got about 25%, so kind of 6 to 8 students. We kicked off a Saturday course last year. That was 50% non-trade. So we're getting a lot more kind of wine enthusiasts, wine lovers that are interested in achieving the qualification. You definitely have to be a little bit more proactive in terms of tasting, in terms of perhaps joining a tasting group than if you're in the trade, because for those of us that are lucky enough to work in the trade, we have wine thrust upon us at regular intervals. So it's really easy to taste widely. So I think it's absolutely possible, and you can achieve a similar grade, but you just have to be a little bit more proactive in terms of making sure that you go to those tastings, that you try the product, which I think is quite a joyous thing. Okay, from Andrew, let's see, online format of broadcast classroom sessions, or so benefiting from the discussion questions raised by others. Yes and no. So it's not a broadcast session, so it's not going through the slides as we would in an in-classroom format. It's, as I say, a series of kind of quizzes and discussions and assignments that are posted to students. You then type out your submission, you submit it, and then you get to see other student submissions. So there is interaction encouraged between other students and other submissions. So you get to kind of critique their submissions as well as getting feedback from an online educator yourself. But there isn't this a presented session as we might see now. There are webinars, absolutely. They've recently introduced, I think, 2 or 3 webinars for the first semester, similar number for the second semester. So there is a level of interaction, real time with the educator, but not in the same way as an in-classroom course. Okay, so Christina, so if you were to enroll for an April 24 semester 1 course, what would be the earliest second semester option? Oh my goodness, let's see. Yeah, so all the courses are available on the website now for this academic year, which ends July, or 31st of July 2024. So let's see, if you started in April, that would put perhaps D2 in June, D4 and 5 in October. So my recommendation would be that you start a second semester course in January 2025. You may be able to start a second semester course in kind of September 2024, but my advice would be do D4 and D5 first, so that you're not trying to study D3 and prepare for the D4 and D5 assessment at the same time. But that's up to you. Okay, right, from Andrew Harper, do we gather the information that we present in D6? No, so it's a literature review. It's not, you're not creating your own data. So you're given a topic, so give you an idea. The current topics are low and no alcohol wines. And the second topic is sustainable viticulture, no, sorry, beg your pardon, regenerative viticulture. And then you're given a title and you have to do a literature review on that title, 3,000 word document, and submit. So you're not creating your own data. Okay, so let's see, from Antonio, if I enroll to a first semester course, is there a time limit? No, not at all. So if something happens, if life gets in the way, then you can apply to defer under our extenuating circumstances policy. If you want to take a break between first semester and second semester, you can. And providing, as I say, there's no significant change in the specification, you shouldn't be asked to repeat assessments. I mean, I always joke to students, Bordeaux is always going to be in Southwest France. It's not going anywhere. It's largely going to be the same production in terms of styles of wine, varieties, climate, etc. So no, it would be rare for them to ask you to repeat an assessment. Will there be any first semester intensive block courses starting in spring? I think there is, yes. I'll check to see whether they're available on the website. Yeah, but we should have another intensive block starting in the next calendar year. Vincent, how flexible are exam dates? Not really. So the way that it works is the exam dates are given to us by the awarding body, and then I construct the courses around those exam dates. So if you can't attend an exam date, then you will have to defer to the next available date. And there aren't that many each year. So my advice would be, if you can't make an examination date, let us know as soon as possible so that we can get you on the next date, so that it doesn't get very expensive paying for resits. or paying to defer those examinations. Or better yet, when you pick a course, make sure that you can be available for all the dates. That would be my top piece of advice. Okay, from Patricia, are there bursaries available? There are. So the bursaries are managed by the wider WSET, not by the school. And I believe there is an email address where you can apply for bursaries, which some students are successful. It can take a little bit of time. So if you would like to go through that phase, then I would suggest applying sooner rather than later, but they are available. And I can provide details on those. And then we're getting towards the end. So I think probably Rachel's tapping her fingers at me. So in terms, Christian, can I mix the session types? Yes. So that's one of the beautiful things about having a semesterized course. If you wanted to start first semester online and second semester evening course, or first semester intensive block, second semester day release, then you can. So you can be a little bit flexible in terms of the format types. So finally, Margarita, when can be expected for new block seminar dates for semester 1 to be released? Latest date for now is end of April for London. Yeah, so I'll be working on that very soon. I would have thought dates are usually confirmed around kind of April, May. So we'll release dates for the next academic year, starting in 1st of August 2024, in May 2024. So I'll be working on those immediately. But I mean, just to give you an idea, the timings, the start dates will be roughly similar to what is currently available. So that might give you an idea in terms of roughly planning things out. Okay. Managed to get through all the questions. If you have any other questions, then do get in touch. There's the email address there. So WSET School Diploma at WSETglobal.com. If you do have any further questions and would like to speak to me in person, then you can come to the Diploma Open Evening. So next Tuesday, we've got an in-person session whereby we'll be going through much of what we've gone through tonight. There'll probably be an opportunity to do a little bit of tasting as well, but it's just a nice opportunity to speak to a member of the team in person, and ask any questions that perhaps you haven't had the opportunity to ask tonight. Okay, well, thank you for your time. Hope that was useful, and hopefully we'll see lots of you on the diploma course soon. Thank you.